The story. 8 years after my divorce, my ex-mother-in-law suddenly asked to borrow $25,000 for medical treatment. Without a second thought, I transferred the money to her. The very next day, my ex-husband rushed to find me, handing me a piece of paper. The automated voice calling the next ticket number echoed monotonously over the intercom, blending with the low grumbles of people waiting in line. The hospital's billing department was, as always, crowded and stifling. I stood in the third row holding a stack of corporate annual physical forms, glancing at my Apple Watch because I was nearing the time for my board meeting. Right in front of me was an elderly woman. She wore a faded brown cardigan, frayed at the elbows. Her frame was frail, her back slightly hunched. Her trembling hands held a pale pink billing statement, constantly smoothing out its creases. The cashier slid a blue debit card back through the slot under the glass window, stating clearly that the card had been declined for the surgery deposit. The older woman frantically took the card back, her voice rising in a panicked explanation. "My son just deposited the money yesterday. Please, could you run it again?" The cashier shook her head, asking her to step aside so the next person could be helped. The people in line behind us began to complain. Someone urged the old woman to hurry up and move because everyone was in a rush. The mounting grumbles caused the woman to panic. She hastily stepped back, her unsteady feet catching on a cracked tile on the floor. She stumbled backward right toward me. On pure reflex, I reached out and caught her frail shoulders. The files in my hand scattered on the floor. The old woman immediately knelt to help me pick them up, stammering apologies. When she looked up to hand the folders back, our eyes met. I froze. My hand reaching out stopped midair. The deep wrinkles of hardship etched into her face, the gray hair falling loosely over her forehead, and those cloudy, resigned eyes. No matter how many years had passed, I could never forget her. It was Martha, Hunter's mother. My ex-mother-in-law. 8 years had passed since the day I packed my suitcases and left that house heading to the airport for a corporate placement in Europe, with a shattered heart and a soul full of resentment. For 8 long years, I cut off all contact, burying myself in my work overseas to climb the corporate ladder to my current position as Director of International Market Development. I thought I had completely forgotten those heartless people, but at this very moment, looking at Martha's haggard appearance, an indescribable feeling surged in my chest. Martha recognized me too. Her eyes widened in shock, then quickly darted downward. Flustered, she took 2 steps back, hiding the medical bill behind her back. Evading my gaze, she turned, intending to walk quickly toward the waiting area. But after a few steps, she stopped dead in her tracks, her shoulders trembling violently. She turned back to look at me, her eyes pleading, cornered by fate. She slowly walked back, her voice hoarse and humiliated as she asked to borrow $2,500. She said she had a tumor that needed emergency surgery, but her son had just lost his job and the bank account was empty. She promised faithfully that next month, she would sell her small ranch house in rural Ohio to pay me back every single cent. Hearing those words, my mind was violently pulled back to the past. 8 years ago, I was just a fresh college grad, nervously following Hunter back to his hometown to meet his family. Hunter's family was poor. Their house was a run-down, single-story farmhouse with a cramped kitchen and walls stained by years of cooking smoke. That day, Hunter had brought me home unannounced. Martha was out in the yard pulling weeds. Seeing her future daughter-in-law, she dropped her trowel, rushed to the hose to wash her hands, and hurried off to the local market. On the drive there, Hunter had casually mentioned that I loved seafood. It was just an offhand comment, and I hadn't paid it much mind. But at dinner, set on a scratched, cheap dining table, Martha brought out a platter of steaming massive Maine lobster tails. I later learned that those lobsters cost nearly half her monthly grocery budget. Throughout the entire meal, Martha didn't touch a single piece of lobster. She just ate a few green beans, keeping her head down as she used her rough, calloused hands to crack the shells, carefully pulling out the sweet meat and placing it onto my plate. She kept urging me to eat, telling me to treat this place like my own home and not to be shy. At that time, I felt genuine warmth from this hardworking, rural woman. I had promised myself I would love her like my own mother. It was just a pity that tragedy struck so quickly. When my father suffered a massive heart attack and needed $30,000 to cover his deductible and co-pays for emergency bypass surgery, Hunter's callousness destroyed everything. He refused to hand over our joint savings, claiming he had lent it to a friend who scammed him. Hunter's family remained silent as they watched my family face ruin. That burning resentment made me walk away carrying the hatred with me until this very day. But right now, standing in front of me wasn't the heartless monster from my memories, but a wretched old woman gambling her last shred of dignity to fight for her life. I decisively waved my hand, cutting off my own wandering thoughts and Martha's awkward explanations. I opened my designer handbag, pulled out my phone, and asked her to read the account number printed on the debit card she was holding. Martha looked at me in bewilderment, her trembling lips reading out the numbers. I quickly navigated my banking app. The screen displayed her name. I typed in exactly $25,000. This was 10 times the amount she had just asked to borrow. With a malignant tumor, $2,500 was just a drop in the bucket, nowhere near enough to cover the surgery, the hospital stay, and the rounds of chemotherapy that would follow. For me, making over $300,000 a year, it was an amount I could afford to part with without a second thought. I authenticated the transfer with Face ID. The app confirmed the transaction. Less than 10 seconds later, the ancient flip phone in Martha's coat pocket dinged with an SMS alert. She hastily pulled it out, squinting at the tiny text on the cracked screen. Reading the long string of numbers, her eyes turned red, brimming with tears. Her knees gave out and she collapsed right onto the hospital lobby floor. She clasped her hands together, bowing to me in the middle of the crowd, completely speechless. Her frail shoulders shook with agonizing sobs. People around us turned to stare. I didn't want to draw attention, nor did I want to prolong this awkward situation. I put my phone away, turned my back, and walked swiftly out the hospital doors. I headed straight for my luxury SUV, parked in the lot, got in, and drove off. I told myself, the debt of those lobster tails from years ago has been paid in full today. From now on, that family and I owe each other nothing. As dusk fell, I drove straight to my high-rise luxury condo in downtown Chicago. It was a $1,500,000 apartment I had bought entirely in cash during my first year back from Europe. I bought this place to have a home for my mother Eleanor and to set up a memorial for my father. My dad had passed away 3 years ago from severe heart failure complications stemming from that delayed surgery. Currently, Eleanor lived here along with Logan, my younger brother, who was 5 years my junior. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell of dinner filled the air. The table in the living room was already set. Logan was glued to the 7.5-inch TV screen, intensely playing his PS5. The deafening sound of gunfire echoed through the room. Seeing me, he just grunted a greeting and kept his eyes locked on his controller. Eleanor walked out of the kitchen carrying a bowl of soup. She set it down and told us to come eat. Less than 5 minutes into the meal, Eleanor suddenly slammed her fork down onto the glass table. The harsh noise startled Logan. Eleanor glared at me, tossing my personal iPad, which I had forgotten on the sofa that morning, onto the table. She demanded an explanation. This afternoon, the screen lit up with an alert. It clearly showed a $25,000 Zelle transfer to an account under the name Martha. She flat out asked if I had just thrown my money at that family of gold-digging hicks. I calmly took a bite of my food and slowly replied that Martha had a malignant tumor and needed immediate surgery, so I lent her the money. Eleanor's face hardened. She began a bitter tirade dredging up the past. She asked if I remembered the day my dad was in the ICU. She reminded me that Hunter's family didn't cough up a single dime to save him, leaving my dad to live a sickly, crippled life before dying early. She yelled at me, calling me an idiot for sticking my nose where it didn't belong, taking my hard-earned money to feed ungrateful parasites. She mocked me, saying I might be a corporate director, but I was stupid enough to be conned by a few fake tears from a country bumpkin. I calmly set my bowl down, put the iPad into my bag, and looked straight into Eleanor's eyes. I stated clearly that the $25,000 was my own money, and I had the absolute right to do whatever I wanted with it. I explained that this money was to repay the kindness of the dinner Martha had prepared for me all those years ago. No matter how terrible Hunter was, I couldn't just stand by and watch an old woman who once treated me well die in a hospital simply because she was broke. My father's early death was an irreparable pain, but I always drew a clear line between the person who committed the sin and the person who once showed me kindness. Eleanor furiously stood up. She grabbed a dish towel and threw it violently onto the floor. Pointing a finger in my face, she cursed me, saying that family would leech onto me like bloodsuckers until they drained me dry. She screamed that I was an unfilial daughter giving money to strangers while penny pinching when my own brother asked for cash to upgrade his car. Hearing her mention Logan, I let out a bitter laugh. I glanced at my brother, who was shrinking into the corner of the sofa, not daring to utter a single word to defend his sister. Dinner was ruined. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and coldly said, I have work to finish at the office. Ignoring Eleanor, as she continued to scream behind me, I walked out. Down in the underground parking garage, I got into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. The silence inside the car was absolute. I opened the center console, pulled out a cigarette, and lit it. Smoke drifted aimlessly in front of me. I cracked the window to let the cold wind in. My mind wasn't actually regretting the $25,000 I had just given away. For an executive like me, that was just a fraction of my yearly bonus. What bothered me was the image of Martha's trembling back, her utter helplessness at the billing counter. Through the cigarette smoke, I remembered her biting her lip, giving up the expensive seafood just for me. Her gentle, hard-working nature was the complete opposite of her irresponsible, cruel son, Hunter. The irony of fate had pushed her into this desperate corner, forcing her to bear the consequences of her son's sins. I crushed the half-smoked cigarette into the ashtray, started the engine, and decided to push this mess out of my head to prepare for a crucial board meeting the next morning. The following day, I walked into the executive boardroom with my usual commanding presence. The Q3 revenue review was incredibly tense. The atmosphere was suffocating as I held the financial reports, pointing out every single dropping metric in the European sales division. I tapped my knuckles against the glass table, demanding the VP of sales explain why our market share was shrinking compared to last year. Every excuse about the global economic downturn was immediately shot down. I demanded actionable recovery plans by the end of the week, refusing to accept any delays or half-hearted attitudes. My strictness left the subordinate staff sitting in dead silence, furiously taking notes. Just as the tension peaked, the boardroom doors clicked open. Lauren, my executive assistant, walked in. She moved quickly to my chair and whispered in my ear. Lauren reported that there was a man waiting at the lobby reception. He absolutely refused to leave, claiming to be an old acquaintance with a matter of extreme urgency that had to be handled in person. I frowned, asking for his name. Lauren hesitated for a second before saying, "Hunter." Hearing that name, my hand froze mid-page. I glanced at the wall clock, calculating quickly. The meeting was supposed to last another 30 minutes, but my ex-husband's sudden appearance completely killed my focus. I signaled for Lauren to step back, then announced an early end to the meeting. I delegated the remaining agenda to the COO, demanding all finalized reports in my inbox by 5:00 p.m. As everyone gathered their laptops and shuffled out, I told Lauren to escort the man straight up to the VIP lounge at the end of the hall. I didn't want my private life becoming water cooler gossip for the entire corporation. I went back to my private office, drank a glass of water to regain my composure, threw on a black designer blazer, adjusted my posture, and slowly walked toward the lounge. In my head, I had already prepared the sharpest, most venomous words to deal with the traitor from 8 years ago. Lauren opened the lounge door, nodded respectfully, and closed it behind me. I stepped in and immediately saw the man huddled on the expensive leather sofa. 8 years is a long time enough to change someone's appearance. But Hunter's deterioration was beyond anything I could have imagined. The arrogant, clean-cut young man I once knew was completely gone. The Hunter of today was a balding, paunchy man with weather-beaten skin and deep wrinkles of exhaustion. He wore a faded gray dress shirt frayed at the collar paired with worn-out slacks that had lost their pleats. Seeing me in my sharp, high-end suit, Hunter jumped up in shock. He wrung his hands together nervously, his demeanor incredibly submissive. Looking down, he stammered a timid greeting. I didn't return it. I walked straight to the armchair across from him, sat down, and crossed my legs, maintaining the coldest expression possible. I looked him dead in the eye, demanding to know what he was doing at my company. Hunter swallowed hard, slowly sitting on the edge of the sofa. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a beat-up plastic folder. His rough, trembling fingers snapped it open, carefully extracting a piece of lined notebook paper neatly folded. He smoothed the paper out on the glass coffee table and slowly slid it toward me. His nervousness and pathetic attempts to appease me felt suffocating. The room was so quiet I could hear his heavy breathing. I didn't touch the paper. I simply tilted my chin, demanding he explain what he had just brought me. Hunter looked up, his voice raspy. He said his mother had forced him to bring this directly to me. Otherwise, she would rather die at home than go into the operating room. I glanced down at the paper. It was a handwritten promissory note, written in the shaky script of the elderly. At the bottom was a signature alongside a bright red thumbprint belonging to Martha. The note explicitly stated she had borrowed $25,000 for medical expenses and pledged to sell her land to repay the principal and interest according to standard federal rates. Hunter continued, his voice dropping. He said his mother had a lot of pride. She never wanted to be seen as a parasite taking advantage of her former daughter-in-law's wealth. She forced him to bring this, forcing me to accept it so she could have peace of mind going into surgery. I gave a cold, cynical smirk, using one finger to slide the paper back toward him. I flatly stated that I didn't need it. I had made it very clear at the hospital the money was for Martha to get treated. I didn't have the time to act as a debt collector for a dying woman, nor did I need him or anyone in his family to pay it back. Hunter hurriedly leaned forward, trying to push the paper back to me. He begged me to just take it so his mother could be at peace. He choked out a pathetic confession. He admitted he was unemployed. His former company had downsized last month, leaving him with zero income. He couldn't secure a loan anywhere to cover her medical bills, forcing him to let his aging mother suffer the humiliation of begging me for money. I listened to his whining with absolute apathy. His struggles had nothing to do with my life. I pointed at the door, ordering him to pack up his trash and leave my office immediately. I told him I was a very busy woman. I didn't have the time to listen to his sob stories about poverty or watch his theatrical display of fake dignity. Hunter froze. His hand pulled back tightly, gripping the edge of the promissory note. The submissive, resigned look in his eyes vanished, replaced by an overwhelming, pent-up frustration. Seeing me stand up to leave, Hunter let out a miserable sigh. He put the paper back in the folder, bit his lip, and delivered a bitter remark. My family really did wrong you all those years ago. For 8 years, my mother has lived in agony. She always blamed herself for having a worthless son who lost a good wife like you. Hunter's words were like a match thrown onto a powder keg. The rage I had suppressed for 8 years violently exploded. I whipped around, slammed my hand onto the table, and yelled. I forbade him from ever bringing up loyalty or feelings in my presence. I enunciated every word, emphasizing that the $25,000 I gave was purely to repay the kindness of the lobster tails his mother had prepared for me on my first visit. That money had absolutely nothing to do with a cold-blooded traitor like him. I told him to stop deluding himself with his hypocritical morality. Anger was strangling my voice. I looked straight into Hunter's eyes, bringing up the agony buried deep in my heart that time could never erase. I asked if he remembered the day my dad was in the ICU. When my father's life was measured in minutes, it was his heartless deception that caused the surgery to be delayed. Though my dad survived the initial attack, his health was ruined. He suffered from severe heart failure and died in agony 3 years ago. Hearing my venomous words, Hunter's chest heaved violently. His weathered face turned bright red from agitation. He opened his mouth to say something, but stopped. His hands clenched into fists, veins bulging on the back of his hands. His initial submissiveness was entirely blown away, replaced by a fierce resistance. The nightmare of 8 years ago flashed vividly in my mind. That day outside the ER, I had dropped to my knees on the cold tile, crying and begging Hunter to go to the bank and withdraw the $30,000 we had saved for a down payment on a house, to pay the hospital deposit to save my dad. Hunter stood there indifferently, taking a drag from his cigarette. He coldly informed me that he had lent that money to his best friend for a business venture, and the guy had fled with the cash. His heartless words had officially killed our marriage. Back in the present, I poured all my contempt into my glare at him. I called him a selfish coward, a man who didn't dare step up to protect his family in a crisis. It was his cowardice that robbed my father of his best chance at recovery. Hearing my insults, the frustration in Hunter broke. Unable to hold it back any longer, he flipped the plastic folder, scattering its contents onto the floor. He reached up violently, unzipping his faded jacket. From a deep inner pocket, he pulled out an item he had kept carefully hidden, an old, worn manila envelope. The envelope was wrapped tightly in multiple layers of clear packing tape to waterproof it. The corners were frayed, the surface stained with sweat, and the passage of time. Hunter gripped the envelope and slammed it down onto the glass table. The thud echoed sharply in the room. He glared at me, his chest heaving rapidly. He demanded an answer in a voice full of resentment. Do you really think I'm that much of a cold-blooded bastard, that I would just watch your father die? He pointed at the heavily taped envelope and shouted, ordering me to open it. Myself. To see where that $30,000 had actually gone. I stared at the yellowed envelope on the table. Hunter's challenge echoed in the silent room. He leaned his hands on the table, getting closer to me, and began pouring out the truth that had been buried for 8 years. Shaking, Hunter admitted that back then he was an idiot. He had secretly lent our entire $30,000 savings to his friend without discussing a single word of it with me. When the guy ran off, Hunter panicked and was too much of a coward to face the truth. He planned to keep it a secret, but Martha, with a mother's intuition, noticed his erratic behavior. Cornered Hunter fell to his knees and confessed everything to her. Hearing that my father was in the hospital waiting for life-saving surgery while her son had lost all the money, Martha made a ruthless decision against herself. Hunter recounted the events, choking back sobs. He said Martha had walked to her local bank branch. She brought her $401k and life savings documents totaling $25,000, money she had scraped together her entire life. She withdrew every single penny. But she didn't stop there. She walked door to door to relatives, begging and borrowing another $3,000. Combined, she had $28,000. She was still short $2,000 to reach the $30,000 needed to save my dad that very night. Knowing my father's condition couldn't wait another minute, Martha gritted her teeth and went to a sketchy payday loan shark operating out of a strip mall. She took out a high-interest predatory loan of $2,000 with interest compounding daily. Thanks to that, by early the next morning, she had the full $30,000 stuffed into a manila envelope for Hunter to take to the hospital. But the real horror happened afterward. After that $30,000 was taken by my mother, Martha was left carrying the crushing weight of the loan shark debt, the interest breeding more interest. At the time, Martha had just been in an accident. Her right leg was immobilized in a cast with steel pins, making walking incredibly painful. Yet, she hid it from Hunter and secretly limped to a commercial poultry processing plant on the outskirts of the city to do piecework to pay off the debt. Her shift started at midnight and went until dawn. She sat on the freezing, bloody concrete floor holding a scraper to clean vats and debone hundreds of pounds of meat. During the day, she went to cheap diners along the interstate to wash dishes. Hunter broke down, sobbing loudly. He described how his mother worked grueling 18-2, 0-hour days in the dead of winter. For an entire month, she worked herself to the bone to pay off that predatory loan. Her hands, constantly submerged in freezing water, became so chapped and infected that the skin cracked open, bleeding fresh blood onto her work gloves. Hearing this, I was stunned. The expensive pen I was holding slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the floor. My shock reached its peak. My mind spun at the story Hunter had just told. I immediately rejected his claims, my tone turning hostile. I pointed right in his face loudly, accusing him of making this up, of fabricating a sob story to extort more money from me. I refused to accept that a traitor was trying to play the victim. Seeing that I didn't believe him, Hunter wiped the tears from his face. He continued telling me about the day he brought the $30,000 in cash to the hospital. It was money bought with his mother's life savings, blood and sweat to pay off a loan shark. Hunter had planned to take the money straight to the billing department to pay for my dad's heart surgery. But as he approached the ICU waiting area, he stopped. He heard my own mother, Eleanor. She was standing there cursing Hunter's family with the most vile words imaginable. She insulted his rural background and humiliated his family's poverty in front of everyone. Out of youthful pride and humiliation, Hunter shrank back, not daring to step out. I lost my patience. I lunged forward and grabbed him by the collar of his frayed shirt. Through gritted teeth, I demanded to know where the $30,000 went. "Where was the money?" I screamed. "If your family brought the money to the hospital, why did my dad miss the window for his surgery?" Hunter squeezed his eyes shut. His arms hung limply at his sides. He didn't even try to fight off my aggressive grip. In a voice of absolute exhaustion, he told me to open the envelope on the table and look at the evidence myself. I shoved Hunter away and spun around, grabbing the taped-up envelope. My nails dug into the layers of packing tape. I violently ripped through it. The torn paper revealed what was hidden inside. On top was a receipt hastily torn from a notebook. The paper was yellowed and curled at the edges, but the handwriting was still clear. The document explicitly stated that the undersigned had received exactly $30,000 in cash from Hunter. In exchange, Hunter was required to immediately sign divorce papers, terminate his marriage with me, and never reveal the origin of the money to anyone. My eyes darted to the bottom of the page to the recipient line. Blazing back at me was a fresh, painfully familiar signature. Beneath the signature, the printed name of the person who took the money, read Eleanor. My own mother. While my mind was spiraling, Hunter stepped to the table and pushed the receipt aside. He pulled out a second document, carefully sealed in a plastic sleeve to protect it from moisture. It was a handwritten last will and testament. Hunter opened it and pointed to the specifics. My eyes scanned the shaky but clear handwriting of an elderly woman. The will was very specific. Martha was leaving her entire plot of rural land to me. This land was currently being acquired by the state under eminent domain for a massive interstate highway expansion. The expected buyout from the government was going to be $1 million. At the bottom of the will was Martha's red thumbprint, right next to the signature of a notary public. I looked up at Hunter, completely failing to understand what this meant. Hunter explained, his voice thick with emotion. He said Martha had actually prepared this will a long time ago. She kept it hidden at the bottom of a wooden chest back home. Yesterday, the moment she received the $25,000 wire transfer from me, she knew she might not survive the surgery. She had someone go to her house, retrieve this document, and bring it to Hunter. She told him that if she didn't make it off the operating table, this would be the only asset she had left to give me. She forced Hunter to bring it to my company and put it directly in my hands no matter what. Hunter explained why his mother did this. For 8 years, Martha believed that because Hunter lost our savings, I had filed for divorce in despair and fled to Europe. She never blamed me for a second. Instead, she carried the guilt, living a quiet life of self-blame for all these years. She considered this $1 million property as a delayed compensation for the pain her family had caused me. Holding the will in my hand, I felt as though all the strength had been drained from my body. If it was true that Martha had scraped together the money and given it to my mother, then why did my mother hide it? Why did Eleanor push me into a corner, forcing me to leave the country? Seeing the sheer terror and confusion in my eyes, Hunter swallowed hard and decided to rip off the final veil, hiding this horrific secret. He finished telling the cruel truth of what happened in the hospital corridor 8 years ago. While Hunter was hiding in the corner listening to Eleanor curse him, my mother suddenly spotted him. Seeing him clutching the manila envelope, Eleanor charged at him. She snatched the envelope from his hands and opened it. Seeing $30,000 in cash inside, her greed and calculating nature instantly took over. My father's life was hanging by a thread, but instead of rushing to the billing desk to pay for the surgery, she calmly pulled a blank sheet of paper and a divorce filing from her purse. Hunter repeated verbatim the insults Eleanor threw at him that day. My mother pointed her finger at his face and told him, "My daughter is about to be sent to Europe for a corporate fast-track program. Her future is in the C-suite, making hundreds of thousands a year." Eleanor declared Hunter was just dead-weight white trash who didn't deserve to be with someone of my status. Eleanor wrote the receipt herself, forcing Hunter to sign it to validate the $30,000 as a buyout for the marriage. She laid down the law, forcing Hunter and his entire family to keep their mouths shut. She forbade him from ever telling me where the money came from. After driving Hunter away, she used Martha's blood money to pay the hospital bill, but turned around and cried to me, lying that my in-laws had left my dad to die, and she had been forced to take out a predatory loan to save him. Her goal was to make me completely disgusted with my husband's family, ensuring I signed the divorce papers. She wanted me to obediently get on that plane, work myself to death overseas, and wire American dollars back home every month to pay off the debt and fund her and Logan's lifestyle. Hunter's words struck me like a lightning bolt. The hospital scene from 8 years ago snapped into sharp focus. I remembered my mother wailing outside the ER. I remembered her constantly bashing Hunter as a traitor and calling his family heartless monsters. Her cruel delay that day, stalling the payment just to secure the divorce, caused my father to miss the critical window for his bypass. My dad lived with severe heart failure for years before dying in agony. Yet she had played the role of the grieving, devoted wife, personally putting her daughter on a plane out of the silent, blood-soaked sacrifice of my ex-husband's family over 8 years completely crushed my remaining sanity. I had been living in a state of manufactured hatred, manipulated by the woman who gave birth to me. Rage flared up violently, incinerating all the composure of a corporate director. I stood up so fast my chair skidded back. I swiped my arm across the table, sending folders and documents scattering across the floor. I grabbed my designer bag and my car keys, pivoting to storm out of the lounge. Seeing me lose control, Hunter panicked and chased after me. He yelled from behind, repeating his mother's order. He said Martha swore that if you don't accept this $1 million piece of land, she won't be able to rest in peace even if she dies. I didn't look back. I marched down the hallway, pulled out my phone, and dialed Lauren. In a tone that allowed for zero pushback, I ordered her to immediately cancel all my meetings and my entire itinerary for the afternoon. I took the elevator straight to the parking garage. I started my luxury SUV, slammed my foot on the gas, and the car shot out of the corporate garage, merging violently into downtown traffic. I steered straight toward my luxury condo, toward the woman and the precious golden boy brother who were sitting comfortably enjoying the money I bled for. I decided I was going to end this era of lies. Today, it took less than 30 minutes to screech into my designated spot in the condo's underground garage. I got into the elevator and hit the button for the 20th floor. My chest was heaving. The the rage making my hands ball into tight fists. I unlocked the door with my fingerprint and shoved the heavy, expensive oak door open, marching straight inside. Walking through the living room, my eyes flicked to the memorial portrait of my father sitting on the mantel, incense burning quietly in front of it. The bitterness peaked as I thought about how that gentle man had been used as a bargaining chip by his own wife. Directly below that, the scene unfolding was the absolute antithesis of the suffering my family and Martha had endured. Logan, my 30-year-old brother, was sprawled out on the imported Italian leather sofa. His feet were propped up on the coffee table, both hands gripping his PS5 controller. He was screaming obscenities at his teammates through an expensive gaming headset. Over in the kitchen, Eleanor was slicing fruit. She was meticulously arranging organic grapes and apple slices on a ceramic platter. Seeing me burst in during the middle of the workday, Eleanor looked surprised. She put the knife down, picked up the fruit platter, and walked into the living room. Her tone was sarcastic as she asked, "What's with the murderous look? Are you regretting the 25 grand you threw at those outsiders yesterday?" I didn't bother answering. I took long strides right to the entertainment center. I reached behind the console and violently ripped the power cord out of the wall. The massive TV went pitch black, immediately followed by Logan's shrieks. He ripped his headset off, threw it onto the sofa, jumped up and screamed at me, asking what the hell was wrong with me for ruining his ranked match. I glared at my parasitic brother, pouring all my contempt into that look. I pulled the photocopied receipt out of my bag, held it up high, and slammed it down onto the glass coffee table right in front of Eleanor. The sharp crack made the fruit platter rattle, sending a few grapes rolling across the hardwood floor. I coldly demanded that Eleanor open her eyes and look at exactly what I had just brought home. Eleanor frowned, annoyed, and leaned over to pick up the paper. It took her less than 3 seconds to process the familiar handwriting. Her complexion changed instantly. Every drop of color drained from her face, leaving her ghost white. Her hands shook violently as she held the receipt, her mouth hanging open, entirely speechless. She knew her perfect 8-year-long charade had just been blown to pieces. Dead silence fell over the room. Seeing his mother panic, Logan snatched the paper to look, but he completely failed to grasp the significance of the old yellowed receipt. I stepped forward, backing Eleanor up against the wall. I began exposing the horrific, cruel crimes of the woman who called herself my mother. I pointed directly at the receipt, spitting out every word. I told her that the $30,000 she took was bought with Martha's blood and tears. To get that cash in the middle of the night, an old woman with a broken leg sold off her retirement, gritted her teeth to take a loan shark's money, and then broke her back, scrubbing vats in a freezing meatpacking plant just to pay it off until her hands bled. And yet she had the cruelty to snatch that envelope blatantly, stealing another woman's sacrifice. Even more maliciously, she was willing to gamble her own husband's life, delaying the hospital payment just to buy enough time to write a receipt and force Hunter to sign divorce papers. She used my in-laws' money to save my dad, but fabricated a story about loan sharks to bleed me dry. My dad missed the golden window for his surgery, suffered for years, and died early, all because of her venomous scheming. I didn't stop there. I laid into her about how maliciously she had brainwashed me to hate my husband's family. She weaponized my grief, forcing me to fly overseas and work like a dog. I recounted the days I spent in Europe. I worked overtime until 2:00 a.m. I skipped meals, worked myself to the point of exhaustion, and was hospitalized twice for a bleeding ulcer entirely alone in a foreign country. All while my own mother and brother sat comfortably at home spending the money I bled to earn. Cornered Eleanor showed absolutely no shame. Instead, she shrieked, making excuses for her actions. She beat her chest, claiming that everything she did was for my future. She brazenly asked me if she hadn't taken decisive action to sever that marriage. Would I be sitting in a director's chair making over $300,000 a year today? She told me I was an ungrateful brat, pointing fingers at the wrong person. I let out a bitter, echoing laugh at my mother's absurd logic. I opened my bag, pulled out my phone, and opened my banking app's expense tracker. I loudly recited every major expense I had funded over the last 8 years. I read out the $30,000 I paid to clear Logan's illegal sports betting debts. I read out the $1,500,000 in cash I paid for this luxury condo. I read out the $100,000 I spent on the Porsche that had my name on the title but that Logan drove. Finally, I tallied up the massive monthly living allowances I sent them. The grand total was over $2 million. I locked my phone screen and shot a dead-eyed glare at Eleanor. I bitterly declared that she never gave a damn about my future. She just turned me into a soulless ATM. Her ultimate goal was nothing but to fund the lazy, entitled lifestyle of her precious golden boy son. The truth being laid bare made Logan jump. Feeling his lifestyle being threatened, he quickly started yelling excuses. He accused me of being petty, saying we were flesh and blood and I shouldn't be counting pennies. He boldly claimed that with my salary, all that money was just spare change, and there was no reason to throw a fit and humiliate our mother over it. I turned my head and looked straight into my shameless brother's face. I stated with absolute finality that as of today, that $2 million was my final payment for the gift of life. It officially bought out our blood ties. Between me and this family, I no longer had any responsibility or obligation to support a parasitic brother and a manipulative, cruel mother. I stepped into the center of the living room and issued my orders clearly. I announced that starting next month, Eleanor's allowance would be slashed to exactly $500. Just enough for basic groceries. Not a single cent extra for Logan to blow. Furthermore, I announced that tomorrow morning, my assistant and a towing company would be coming to the parking garage to repossess the Porsche. The car was in my name, and Logan didn't have the right to hold on to it for one more day. Hearing that the car was being taken and the gravy train was cut off, Eleanor lost her mind. She lunged forward, blocking the front door, pointing her finger in my face. She hysterically threatened that if I dared do this, she would march right down to my corporate headquarters. She said she'd make signs, call the press, and expose my unfilial behavior to all my employees and corporate partners. She screamed, daring me to go to war with my own mother. I wasn't fazed by her threats for a second. I glared at Eleanor, delivering the final fatal blow. I dared her to come to my office and make a scene. I clearly stated that my corporation's massive legal team would be there to greet her. With bank transfer records, the condo deed, the car title, plus charges for public disturbance and defamation, my lawyers would have a field day destroying her in court for extortion. I added that the evidence of Logan's illegal offshore sports betting was still saved on my hard drive, more than enough to send her precious baby boy to federal prison for a few years. Having dropped that bomb, I didn't wait for another reaction from either of them. I reached out and shoved Eleanor hard out of the way. I unlocked the door, stepped out into the hallway, and slammed the door shut. The heavy wooden impact echoed loudly. It marked the exact moment I shattered the chains of manipulation that had imprisoned me for 8 long years. The next morning, I drove myself 20 miles to the Regional Oncology Center. The agonizing wait was over. The $30,000 debt from 8 years ago had been cleared. His family owed me absolutely nothing. I took a step back, crossed my arms over my chest. I looked straight into Martha's eyes, my tone turning resolute. I clearly declared that the financial debt was settled, but now it was time for me to fairly repay the kindness of those lobster tails from 8 years ago. I turned and ordered Hunter to immediately go fill out the paperwork to transfer Martha to a better hospital. I informed them I had booked the premium VIP recovery suite at Mount Sinai. Every single expense, from the private ambulance transport to the $30,000 surgery deposit, had already been paid in full by my assistant that morning. I had also personally pulled corporate strings to ensure the chief of thoracic surgery would be the lead surgeon for her operation. Hunter's eyes widened in shock. His mouth opened and closed, unable to form words. Tears streamed down Martha's face. Her calloused hands tightly gripped the edge of her blanket. She kept shaking her head, refusing, saying she couldn't accept another favor from me because she had no way to pay it back. I cut Martha off with one final ironclad statement. I declared that this medical funding wasn't a charity handout. My only condition was that she had to fight tooth and nail to walk out of that operating room alive. Only when she survived and recovered would this debt of gratitude be officially wiped clean. I didn't give the two of them a chance to offer another refusal. I turned my back and took long, decisive strides out of that depressing hospital room. Martha's major tumor extraction surgery took place the very next day, lasting a grueling 9 hours. I wasn't sitting in the hospital waiting room like the other families. Instead, I chose to bury myself in paperwork, processing a stack of new international contracts at my executive desk. The workload helped me briefly forget the tense reality unfolding in the OR. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text. The screen lit up with a short message from Hunter's number. He texted exactly 8 words: surgery successful. Mom is stable in the ICU. Reading the text, I set my phone down on the desk. The invisible, crushing weight that had sat on my shoulders for years suddenly vanished. I called Lauren into my office and told her to book me a first-class ticket for a week-long vacation in the Mediterranean. I needed time to recharge for a completely new beginning. 3 months after that event, at a high-end rehabilitation and assisted living facility surrounded by oak trees in the suburbs, I drove around to the back patio to visit the patient one last time. From a distance, I saw Martha sitting in a wheelchair soaking up the sun under a large tree. The color had returned to her skin. Her expression was completely at peace. Standing next to her was Hunter, wearing the blue uniform of an Amazon delivery driver. He was carefully peeling an orange, handing the slices to his mother. Seeing me approach, Hunter awkwardly stood up straight, smoothing down the front of his uniform. He timidly thanked me, promising faithfully that he would work as hard as he could, picking up extra delivery shifts day and night to slowly save up and pay me back for the hospital bills. Martha reached out and took my hand, smiling a gentle, warm smile. She earnestly invited me to stay and eat lunch at the rehab center's cafeteria. She said today the kitchen was serving pot roast, which she knew I used to love. The image of that smoky, poor rural kitchen, filled with human warmth from years ago, flashed through my mind. But I smiled gently and slowly withdrew my hand. I used the excuse of year-end corporate projects keeping me busy to politely decline her invitation. I turned and walked slowly down the white gravel path toward the facility's gates. From behind, Hunter called out to me. He said thank you, offered a long overdue apology, and wished me a bright and peaceful life ahead. Hearing those words, I didn't turn back. I just raised one hand in the air, giving a slight wave goodbye. I got into my luxury SUV and slid my designer sunglasses over my eyes. I told my driver to start the car and head straight back to corporate headquarters. At 35 years old, having personally dismantled the heavy burdens of the past and permanently severed ties with toxic manipulation, my free and brilliant life was finally truly beginning.